Okay, so before we talk about all of this and all of this, we're talking about the upper arm, and we're just going to talk about all the arteries that innervate muscles, bones, etc. of the upper arm. So from the top of your shoulder all the way down to your digits. Okay, but before I go break this whole thing down, I'm going to break it down just in like a diagram and like a scheme, okay? Pause. Okay, so the scheme on how blood's going to flow out of the body is going to come from the heart, and then to get it to the upper arm, I'm not just saying the right arm or the left arm, but for the video and for understanding purposes, I'm just going to talk about the right arm. Our body, we know, is symmetrical, so whatever's on the right side is going to be on the left side. So we start off with the heart, right? And the heart's going to pump blood out from where? The left ventricle out through the aorta, right? Okay, that's going to branch into different ways, right? It's going to branch into different arteries. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, the first one is going to be the right subclavian artery, right? This is going to be on the right side of my body. Or you can go left side of the body. This would be left subclavian. Whatever happens on the right side is exactly what's going to happen on the left side. Okay, so we're going to talk about the right subclavian artery right here. Okay, so the right subclavian artery is the main artery, right? If you sever this, you're probably going to die. You're going to branch down. The subclavian artery is going to branch into multiple different subsections. All of these things are subsections from the subclavian artery. Okay, so first we're going to have the internal thoracic artery. We're going to have a suprascapular artery, a vertebral artery, and a thyrocervical artery. We're also going to have an axillary artery. Okay, the thyrocervical artery is going to branch down from the subclavian artery into 4 different things. We're going to get the ascending cervical, inferior thyroid, cervicodorsal trunk, and the suprascapular. These arteries are coming off of the branch of the thyrocervical, which is coming off of the branch of the right subclavian artery. Okay, now axillary is coming off of right subclavian artery also. It's going to branch into multiple things. It's going to branch into the posterior or anterior circumflex humeral artery, the superior thoracic artery, the lateral thoracic artery, the thoracoacromial artery, the brachial artery, and the subscapular artery. These are all coming from axillary, right? Which is all coming from the right subclavian. After that, the subscapular artery can branch into 2 different arteries. The circumflex scapular artery or the thoracodorsal artery. Also, the axillary artery branches into the brachial artery. This is going to branch into 3 other things. It's going to branch into the deep profunda brachii, the radial, and the ulnar. Okay, so the brachial artery comes from the axillary. The axillary comes from the right subclavian or left subclavian, depending which side of the body you're on. Okay, so the right subclavian to the axillary, to the brachial, to now the deep, radial, or ulnar. Okay, so the brachial branches into the deep profundi brachii. The radial is going to branch into multiple things. And then the ulnar is going to branch into multiple things. First, the radial, I should have wrote this, is going to branch into 2 different things. It's going to be the princeps pollicis. Okay, so this one. And then it's also going to branch into one other thing. It's going to be the radialis indicis. Radialis indicis. Okay, that's branching off the radial artery. Now, the ulnar artery is going to have its own branches as well. It's going to branch out to the anterior ulnar recurrent artery, the posterior ulnar recurrent artery, and the common interosseous artery. Okay, before we go forward, we have to remember brachial goes to radial, radial goes to princeps pollicis or radialis indicis. Brachial to ulna, ulna goes to anterior ulnar recurrent, posterior ulnar recurrent, or common interosseous. Okay, now the common interosseous has its own division as well. This is going to branch into the anterior interosseous or the posterior interosseous. Okay, that's the anterior side and posterior side of your arm. Okay, anterior interosseous and posterior interosseous. See how I have an orange line here? This is called an anastomosis. An anastomosis is when 2 things fuse together and form or deviate from one branch. So it's going to be 2 branches forming one or 1 branch forming 2. That's an anastomosis. So let's take it from the top. Brachial, ulna, ulna, common interosseous to anterior or posterior interosseous. These things are fusing together, called an anastomosis, and it's forming the dorsal carpal arch. Okay. Now, before I keep going here, the radial, which we know is coming from brachial, right? Radial is going to form, it's going to mix with the ulnar. The radial and ulnar are going to form together in an anastomosis, and it's going to form three different things. They're going to form the deep palmar arch, the superficial palmar arch, and then the dorsal carpal arch. The dorsal carpal arch, we said, comes from the anterior and posterior interosseous. However, it still needs an innervation, so also an anastomosis, from the radial and ulnar arteries. Okay? So, after we go through these steps, right, we could start off on the right side and we go from right to left. So, brachial, radial ulna. Radial ulna makes superficial, deep, and dorsal, right? Okay, so the superficial palmar arch is then going to create the common palmar digital. But in order to make this, it needs to get innervated through an anastomosis from the palmar metacarpal. Palmar metacarpal is created from the deep palmar arch. So we go radial ulna, deep palmar, palmar metacarpal, these anastomosis with a superficial palmar arch to form the common palmar digital. Okay, the common palmar digital now makes the proper palmar digital arteries. Okay, so now, remember, we have ulnar makes common interosseous, anterior, posterior interosseous. Radial and ulna makes deep palmar arch, which then anastomosis makes the dorsal carpal arch. This anastomosis from these three innervations makes the dorsal metacarpal arteries. The dorsal metacarpal arteries are then going to make the dorsal digital arteries. Okay, so we have the proper palmar digital arteries and the dorsal digital arteries anastomosis together, so they're fusing together at the end of our hand, and they're going to form the oblique intercapitular arteries. This is the flow chart how the arteries go throughout the body. It's going to be a lot easier when I explain it on the structure itself, but if you guys know this flow chart, you're going to be able to deviate from any bone, muscle, tendon, etc. So, I would take a picture of this, hold it on the side as I'm going through the upper body, because it would make it much more easier for you guys to actually see what I'm talking about based on the flow chart. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how all the arteries flow throughout the body. I know it's kind of hard to deviate, but just think about it. This is the upper arm, here's the humerus, the clavicle, the scapula. I have the radius and the ulna, and this is the hand, the metacarpals. The metacarpals are here, the phalanges, right? Okay. This little box, we're going to get to it later. Same with this little box. So I'm going to be bouncing back and forth based on, we're going to go in order. We're going to go from the top all the way down to the bottom. That's the easiest way for me to do it. Okay, so what did we say in the first video, in the little flow chart? We started where? The heart, right? And the heart's going to separate into different arteries, and then those different arteries are going to separate into other arteries. So we're going to separate first into the right subclavian artery, right? We're talking about the right side. And remember, this is anatomical position. So this is the pinky, ring finger, middle finger, index finger, and thumb. Not the best illustration. I'm not too good at drawing. But if we're in anatomical position, this is how it would be. Radius is going to be on the outside. Ulna is going to be on the inside. Humerus, scapula, clavicle, etc. Okay. So first, the right subclavian artery. This thing we said, it's going to go from, we could have the right or left, right? And then we're going to branch into 4 different things. Okay, what did we say it could branch into? We said it could branch into the internal thoracic, the thyrocervical or suprascapular, the vertebral, or the axillary, right? Those are the 4 main branches from the right subclavian. However, what I didn't mention, and I'm going to mention here, that some of these branches have little branches along with them. Okay, so the first one we're going to do the internal thoracic artery, right? So we follow the right subclavian, right? And the first branch we have, it's going to be above the clavicle. is the internal thoracic artery. It's going to be right here, right? It's that pink one. So you see that there's 3 little purple lines branching off of him. Those 3 inner lines represent 3 different arteries. Okay, we have the anterior intercostal, we have the musculophrenic, and we have the superior epigastric arteries. These 3 arteries are branched off of what? The internal thoracic artery. Okay. The next branch of the right subclavian we have is over here. We have the thyrocervical trunk. The thyrocervical trunk has 4 little arteries branching off of him too. What does he have? He has the ascending cervical, the suprascapular, the inferior thyroid, with the cervicodorsal. These 4 arteries branch off the thyrocervical trunk. Okay. Above the thyrocervical trunk is the vertebral, right? Still branching off the right subclavian. The vertebral artery, right? Then, underneath that, we have the last one. We have the, or not the last one, but remember I said thyrocervical could also be the suprascapular? Okay, so thyrocervical has it's this pink one, and it has the 4 branches. One of those branches was the suprascapular. However, in some people, like every body's a little bit different, we have all genetic differences. Some people have a suprascapular artery that branches off the right subclavian. It doesn't have to branch off of the thyrocervical trunk. Even though it does for most people, some people have that branch by itself. Okay. The last artery I want to talk about for the right subclavian is the axillary artery. The axillary artery is just, so we have right subclavian, right? Things branching off of it. It's not branching off of the right subclavian. It's a continuation of the right subclavian. So this whole artery, right? Everything you see in red technically could be the right subclavian. However, there's different branch points of it. The different branch points come out, right? But they convert into different things. So right subclavian, down here it's going to be called axillary. Down here it's going to be called ulnar or radial. It's not going to be called right subclavian. We just deviate things. But it's all connected to one big tube. Okay, so axillary artery is going to be right here. It's going to be located right under the clavicle, like you see here. Well, remember suprascapular? Supra is above clavicle, right? Axillary is going to be under the clavicle. Okay. Axillary artery is going to branch into multiple things as well. He's going to branch into 6 different things. He branches into the superior thoracic, thoracoacromial, lateral thoracic, anterior or posterior circumflex, subscapular, sub for underneath, and then the brachial artery. Okay, so we're going to start off with the superior thoracic artery. The superior thoracic artery is coming right from here, right? I have him branched off of the axillary artery, right? And he flows into 3 different things. The superior thoracic artery has 3 different branches. He branches into the pec major, right? The serratus anterior, and the first and second intercostals of the ribs. Okay, so the axillary artery is coming from the armpit, kind of. And now we have the what? Superior thoracic branches into the lateral pec, the pec major, right? The ribs, and then the serratus anterior. Right here, you see serratus anterior, first and second intercostal of the ribs, and the pec major. Okay. After that, we have the thoracoacromial, right? Thoracoacromial is right here, branching off the axillary artery, and he deviates into 4 different things as well. He deviates into the first, he goes right and innervates the pec minor, right? Here's the pec minor, here's the pec major. He innervates the pec minor as his major function. He also deviates into the pectoral, deltoid, acromial, and clavicular arteries. So, how am I going to represent this? We know deltoid is by the shoulder, pectoral is where the pec minor is, right? What else? Clavicular goes up to the clavicular, up here, and then the acromial gets branched off the scapula. So he flows all the way back towards the scapula. Okay, after him, we have the lateral thoracic. Lateral thoracic, right? Here's the axillary artery, coming from where? Right subclavian artery, remember that. Right subclavian, axillary, right? Axillary is branching off of now to the lateral thoracic. This branches off of him. The lateral thoracic innervates the lateral portion of the breast, so the pecs, the lateral sides, right? Not medial, the lateral sides. Okay, now another artery that's branching off axillary is the anterior posterior circumflex humeral artery, right? So here it is, branches off. Okay, anterior is the front side, right? Posterior is the back side. You just have to visualize this. I can't draw in 3D. Anterior, posterior. It's just wrapping around what? The kind of the top of the shaft, kind of where the surgical neck is. It probably would continue over here, a little up in this area, right? Because when you fracture the surgical neck, these are the arteries that you're damaging mostly. Okay. Next, we have the subscapular. Okay, so subscapular is going to branch down, right? What does subscapular mean? Below the scapula. Suprascapular would be above the scapula. Okay, axillary artery, now we have the subscapular, right? Unfortunately, the subscapular is going to branch into two things as well. He's going to branch into the circumflex scapula, and he's also going to branch into the thoracodorsal. Okay, so the circumflex scapula artery, right, is going to circumflex, that means go around what? The scapula. He does mainly the lateral border though. So you see I have this little line going to the lateral side of the scapula. He's going to circumflex the lateral border of the scapula. Okay. He also, what's it called? He also goes to the infraspinous fossa. So he goes to the lateral border of the scapula and the infraspinous fossa. What happens when you have one artery separating to two different things? You have an anastomosis. So he is also an anastomosis. Lateral border and infraspinous fossa. Okay. Next, you have the brachial artery. The brachial artery is what? It's not going to branch off. It's just a continuation of this whole chain that we talked about. So we had right subclavian artery, axillary artery, now we have brachial artery. Okay. But before we talk about the brachial artery, I'm going to bring you to this little snapshot right here. Okay. Remember, we had right subclavian. So right subclavian became axillary. Axillary I have right here. Okay, so if you look at this is the posterior view. This is all an anterior view, this whole entire diagram. But this right here is the posterior view. So on the posterior side, we see we have teres major, we have the rhomboid minor, we have a levator scapulae, right? Okay, so the axillary artery is going to deviate into, we said, a dorsal scapular artery, right? And it's also going to deviate into an intercostal artery. These things are going to anastomosis together, and they're going to innervate the back part of the scapula. Okay, the axillary artery also branches into, we said, suprascapular artery, right? Right up here, suprascapular, above the scapula. Okay, so above the scapula, what's it going to innervate? It's just going to innervate the posterior side of the scapula, the back side and the top. Next, the circumflex scapular branch. Remember I talked about the circumflex scapula? Okay, he also innervates the posterior side of the scapula. Right where? Right above the teres major. After the axillary artery keeps flowing through the scapula on the anterior side, it doesn't flow through the posterior side, it flows through the anterior side, he becomes the brachial artery. Okay, now we're back to the brachial artery, what we talked about. Brachial artery is going to have multiple branches as well. So all of these things are just branching off. Like you have a tree, think of the right subclavian artery as a tree. After the tree, trees have branches have little branches that come off of them. Okay, brachial artery. He's going to branch into the profunda brachii, superior ulnar collateral, inferior ulnar collateral, ulnar, and radial. That's going to be his branches, right? He has a couple of them. Okay, so we're going to start off with the profunda brachii, right? This is going to be along the radial groove of the humerus with the radial nerve because it's on the same side. And the arteries are going to have an anastomosis, right? And that anastomosis is going to go around the elbow joint. So here we have the profunda brachii, right? He's flowing down, and he's just going to get an anastomosis around the elbow. Okay, not too bad. From him, we have the superior ulnar collateral, right? Okay, superior ulnar collateral is also going to branch off of the brachial. We have superior ulnar collateral and inferior ulnar collateral. Superior would be above, inferior, it makes sense, superior, inferior. And then the superior ulnar collateral is going to go along the ulnar nerve. Why? Because we're on the ulnar side of the body. The profunda brachii is on the radial side. Radial, ulnar. Okay. So if we're going along the ulnar side, it's going to go with the ulnar nerve. And what is it going to do? Ulnar is, it's going to form an anastomosis right? And it's going to help also innervate the posterior elbow. That's what the ulnar side is going to do. Okay. Now, the inferior ulnar collateral is going to be anterior to the medial epicondyle. So we remember medial epicondyle was right here. Anterior, so it's above it, right? And it's going to also make an anastomosis with the anterior ulnar collateral artery. Okay, so we have superior, inferior, anterior, all different types of arteries, right? Artery. It went to the profunda brachii, superior ulnar collateral, inferior ulnar collateral, right? Okay, so now the brachial artery is going to branch. It's going to, like a fork in a road. It's going to be a fork in a road right here. It's called something I forget. But it's going to be a fork in the road, and it's going to deviate into the ulnar and radial artery. So we know this is the radius, so this is going to be the radial artery. And we know this is the ulnar, so this is going to be the ulnar artery, right? Okay, for the purposes of the video and demonstration, we have to try to remember the radial artery is going to be on the posterior side of the arm. Why? Radial artery and radial nerves help with extension. Ulnar, we're going to think about it on the, what side? Anterior side of the forearm, because it helps with flexion, so it flexes. So this is going to be anterior, this is going to be posterior. I know, you just have to try to visualize it. Okay, so we're going to talk about ulnar first. The ulnar comes from brachial, right? And it deviates into multiple things. It's going to deviate into the anterior ulnar, posterior ulnar, common interosseous, and the common interosseous is going to deviate into other things as well. So first, the ulnar, right? It's the large terminal branch of the brachial artery in the cubital fossa. So I'm not going to draw a box because it's going to make the image look really poor. But if I were to draw a box right here, this would be the cubital fossa, right here in the forearm. This is where a lot of our arteries, nerves, everything innervates, right? Okay, so the ulnar artery is going to be deep, and it's going to innervate the pronator teres and the palmaris longus. We know the pronator teres does what? It helps pronate the hands, pronate. And we know that the radial nerve is deep and the medial nerve is kind of superficial. So if we're talking about the ulnar artery, it's going to be deep in the arm, and it's going to innervate the muscles that are deep. That's the pronator teres for pronation, and the palmaris longus. Palmaris longus is for the hands. Okay, so now, it also helps innervate the flexor digitorum superficialis, which is going to be interior. It's not going to be, intermediate, not as deep. And then it's also going to innervate the superficial muscles, which are the flexor retinaculum and the Guyane canal, right? Okay, so the flexor retinaculum is kind of superficial. The Guyane canal is superficial. The intermediate ones we spoke about are the flexor digitorum superficialis, and the deep ones are the pronator teres and the palmaris longus. Okay, so now the ulnar artery is going to branch into two different regions as well. So the ulnar artery is going to have an anterior and a posterior recurrent artery. Okay, why would you want to what is a recurrent artery? These arteries are basically arteries that anastomose with different regions of the brachial artery. Why? Okay, so if we're down here, right, and we have a disturbance in one of the ulnars, in the ulnar nerve, but the brachial artery is free, we could still get blood flow down to some parts of the bone through these anastomoses. Okay, so I have the superior ulnar collateral, right? Remember we talked about that one? And we have the inferior ulnar collateral right here, these two. Okay, so right underneath that we have the anterior and the posterior ulnar recurrent arteries. See, I have a little a receptor and a ball, like a target, kind of like biochemistry. It's not the same, but I just drew it for a visualization. They connect, and they connect forming an anastomosis, which is going to help bring blood from the brachial to the ulnar artery. Okay, so we're going to say the anterior ulnar recurrent artery does the superficial brachialis, the pronator teres, and then the anastomosis with the inferior ulnar collateral and medial epicondyle. We said that. Okay, now the posterior ulnar recurrent artery is posterior to the medial epicondyle, meaning behind, right? and it's deep to the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris. And this anastomosis with the with the superior ulnar collateral artery. Okay, so superior goes with anterior, right? And inferior is going to go with the posterior. Okay, so now, the posterior recurrent artery, we're at the common interosseous artery, right? This is laterally, it's deep, and it goes to the anterior posterior interosseous. Okay, so here we go. The ulnar nerve continues to proceed down, right? And it forms the common interosseous artery, right here, this pink one. Branching off of the common interosseous artery, we have the anterior, meaning in front, and posterior, meaning behind, interosseous artery. What do these arteries do? Okay, so the anterior interosseous artery innervates the pronator quadratus and the dorsal carpal arch. It also innervates, the posterior interosseous innervates between the superficial and the deep extensor muscles. Okay, so if it's posterior interosseous, it means it's in the back side, and we said the back side does what? Extension. And if it's the anterior interosseous, we know it's on the front side, and it helps with flexion. Okay, so now these two arteries are going to also innervate and form the recurrent interosseous, right? This is going to be posterior to the radial ulnar joint, and it's going to anastomose with the medial collateral artery. Okay, so it's going to be back here. It's going to be deep to this joint, the deep side of it. Okay, now another branch of the brachial artery is the radial artery, right? So we have ulnar, radial. We have right subclavian to axillary, axillary to brachial, brachial to radial or ulnar. Now we're going to talk about radial. Radial is going to innervate the lateral to the, it's going to be lateral to the flexor carpi radialis, and it's going to be around the anatomical snuff box of the hand. Okay, and now the radial recurrent is going to be between the brachioradialis and the brachialis, and it's going to supply both of them at the elbow joint. This is going to form an anastomosis with the radial collateral artery from the profunda brachial artery. Okay, what is the profunda brachial artery? So the profunda brachial artery, right, comes off of the brachial artery. It's going to have a artery coming off of him called the radial collateral artery. The radial collateral artery is then going to, form with the radial recurrent artery into the radial artery. It's another anastomosis. Okay, now, if we talk about the ulnar and radial together, right, as they flow down together, we're going to start going to the wrist and the hand. Okay, so the ulnar is going to form the palmar carpal branch and a dorsal carpal branch, right? The palmar carpal branch is going to be distal to the forearm, and it's going to anastomose with the palmar carpal branch of what? The radial artery. Okay, so the ulnar carpal branch and the radial carpal branch are going to form together. Okay, the dorsal carpal branch is going to be proximal to the pisiform. This is on the ulnar side, remember, and it's going to anastomose with the dorsal carpal branch of the radial artery. And this is going to form the dorsal carpal arch. Okay, so if we look at it from the radial side, it should be the same thing but backwards. The palmar carpal branch of the radial artery should go, it's distal to the radial artery near the pronator quadratus. It's going to anastomose with the palmar carpal branch of the ulnar artery, like we said, and it's going to form the palmar carpal arch. These are the same. So now the dorsal side, it's distal to the radial artery, proximal to the anatomical snuff box, right? This one was what? Deep to the anatomical snuff box. And this is going to form the dorsal carpal arch. Okay, so when you have the palmar carpal branch right here, right? You have the deep carpal branch and you have the palmar carpal branch. They're going to come together, branching off of the radial and ulnar artery, right? You have the deep is the pink one. You have the palmar is the other pink one, right? They're going to fuse together and form two different things. If you could see, it's kind of hard to see right here, but the deep side is going to be the deep carpal arch, and the posterior side is going to be the palmar carpal arch, right? But they're fused together. These are fused together. Okay, so if we keep descending down the radial and ulnar artery, we're going to deviate into a couple of structures. Okay, so ulna and radial, right? They're going to anastomose, and they're going to form three different things. The first thing they're going to form is the superficial pulmonar arch and the deep pulmonar arch, right? We spoke about them. These things, right? The superior pulmonar arch is going to make the common palmar digital, with the deep pulmonar arch is going to make the palmar metacarpal. When these two things fuse together, they form the common palmar digital. Okay, so if we look at it on the diagram, you have the superficial pulmonar arch, right over here. Then you have the deep pulmonar arch, which is right over here. These two things are on the bottom. This is the front side, this is the back side, right, of the hand. What branches off of those? We said you have the common palmar digital, right? What's the common palmar digital? The common palmar digital, it's common because it sends blood to the digits, right? But where? It only sends it to the wedges, like not the web side of your digits. So if you follow this pink artery, it's just going to the web areas of the hand. That's the common palmar digital. Okay, so the radial, we also said, makes the princeps pollicis, which is for the thumb, and it also makes the radialis indicis, which is for the index finger, right? But we said index finger was medial. So which side is it going to be on? It's only going to send blood to the lateral side of the index finger. Okay, now, here we have the princeps pollicis, right? It's coming off of the dorsal carpal arch, so it's going to send blood down. It's going to come off of the radial artery, and it's going to send blood to the thumb. Now, the index finger, right, we said right over here, is going to take blood from the radialis indicis, and this is going to branch off of one or two things. It could branch from the princeps pollicis, or it could branch directly from the radial artery. So if you see the red is the radial artery, the pink one, this one, is the princeps pollicis, and now the radialis indicis comes from either the radial artery or the princeps pollicis down to the index finger. The lateral side of the index finger, right over here, not the medial, lateral side. What's going to do the medial side then? Okay, so we said the radial artery and ulnar artery, right, form three different structures. The third structure is when the common interosseous, right, the anterior and the posterior, anastomose with the radial artery, and it forms the dorsal carpal arch. The dorsal carpal arch is then going to form something else. He's going to then form the dorsal metacarpal. The dorsal metacarpal is then going to form the dorsal digital arteries. Okay. Also, the common palmar digital is going to form the proper palmar digital arteries. Okay. So if we have the common palmar digital, which is right here, right? This was for all the webs. Right underneath it is going to be the proper palmar digital, right here. It's going to go all the way down to the index fingers, right? But for which side? So if we're talking about the ulnar, we're on the anterior side. Now, if we have one coming from the radial side, it's going to be the dorsal digital arteries, right? Not proper palmar, we're going to say dorsal. That's going to be the back. So it's going to supply the blood on the back side of the hand. These things are going to fuse together, and they're going to form the oblique intercapitular arteries. That's everything. So there was a lot going on when we were talking about the elbow, and I'm not sure if I mixed it up or not in the video, but I just want to go over it one more time. The superior and the inferior, right? And then we have anterior and posterior, right? Different muscles, different arteries. Superior ulnar collateral artery comes from the brachial, right? And then it's going to anastomose with the posterior ulnar recurrent artery. Okay, so we have superior, right, with the posterior. Now, the inferior brachial artery is going to anastomose with the anterior recurrent artery. So we're going to have inferior with anterior, superior with posterior. Remember, superior is the top one, posterior is the back one. So superior and posterior are going to anastomose. Inferior is the bottom one. Inferior is going to anastomose with the anterior. So anterior is the front one. Inferior and anterior are going to anastomose together.